The first time my wife called my company a joke, she didn't know the joke was paying for half the room she was laughing in. The restaurant sat on the 32nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Columbus, the kind of place where the steaks came out on white plates with 3 asparagus spears and a price nobody said out loud. Rain tapped against the windows in soft silver lines, blurring the city lights until they looked expensive and distant. Madison looked perfect under that warm amber glow, blonde hair tucked behind one ear, navy dress sharp enough for a boardroom, wedding ring catching the candlelight every time she lifted her glass. Across from her sat Blake Harrington, NorthBridge Retail Group's vice president of business development, smiling like he had rented the whole skyline for himself. Around us were 6 other executives, all polished shoes, soft hands, careful laughter. I was the only man at the table with calluses under his fingernails. I had washed twice before leaving the house, but I could still smell cardboard dust and diesel on my jacket, the honest perfume of a warehouse day. I didn't mind it. Madison did. She had minded it for years, only now she had stopped hiding it. Blake leaned back in his chair, swirled his drink, and looked at me like I was a stain the waiter had missed. "So, Ethan," he said, "Madison tells us you run some kind of little delivery outfit." His words landed light, but the table heard what he meant. Little. Outfit. Not company. Not business. Madison gave a quick laugh, the kind people use when they want to stay invited. "It's a small business," she said, waving one hand like she was brushing lint off her life. "Honestly, sometimes it feels more like a hobby with invoices." The table chuckled. Not loud, not cruel enough for anyone to feel guilty, just enough to make my ears warm. I looked down at my water glass and watched a bead of condensation crawl toward the tablecloth. That little line of water moved slowly, quietly, refusing to stop just because people were watching. Blake grinned wider. "A hobby with invoices. I like that. What do you move, Ethan? Office chairs? Lawn equipment? Amazon returns?" A woman near the end of the table covered her smile with her napkin. Madison didn't. She leaned closer to Blake and said, "He likes to call it logistics. I call it surviving with a loading dock." That one got real laughter. Even the man from finance, who had barely spoken all night, let out a short bark into his wine. I felt the sound pass over me like cold air from an open freezer door. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I had learned a long time ago that a man only looks small when he begs people to measure him correctly. So I sat there in my charcoal sport coat, the one Madison said made me look almost presentable, and I let them laugh. My phone buzzed once against my thigh. I ignored it at first. Then it buzzed again, steady and polite, the way important things often announce themselves. I slid it halfway from my pocket beneath the edge of the table. The screen lit up with an email notification from Richard Lawson, Chief Financial Officer at NorthBridge. Subject line, renewal agreement, final approval needed. I stared at those words while Madison kept smiling at people who didn't know my name was on the contract, keeping their Midwest distribution from collapsing. NorthBridge didn't know me as Ethan Caldwell, the husband with the old Ford F-150 and work boots by the mudroom door. On paper, they knew Caldwell Regional Solutions, the quiet vendor that had cut their late deliveries by 43%, rescued 3 major store launches, and saved them a little over $11 million in penalty exposure over 18 months. They knew the company. They just didn't know the man. Madison didn't know either, not because I lied, but because she had stopped asking questions about my world the moment she decided it was beneath hers. I locked the phone and placed it face down beside my plate. Madison noticed the movement and gave me that tight married smile that meant don't embarrass me. Funny thing about embarrassment. It changes shape depending on who is holding the truth. Blake lifted his glass again. "To real business," he said. The others raised theirs. Madison raised hers too. I picked up my water because I had to hold something and because my hand was steadier than I expected. "Real business," I repeated softly. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. Maybe the hurt had gone too deep for shaking. Maybe after enough years of being corrected, minimized, and edited out of your own marriage, something inside you stops bleeding and starts recording. Blake didn't hear the edge in it. Madison didn't either. She was too busy glowing in the approval of people who would have panicked if they knew the man they were mocking had a renewal clause sitting in his inbox, and signed, untouched, and suddenly heavier than any wedding ring in that room. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the glass, low and distant, like a truck crossing an empty bridge at midnight. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and saw not the woman who once ate burgers with me on the tailgate behind my first rented warehouse, but a stranger who had learned to laugh at the dirt under my nails while spending money built by those same hands. The waiter set down my steak and asked if everything looked all right. Madison answered for the table. Everything is perfect. I almost smiled, because for the first time all night, she was wrong. By the time dessert menus came around, I had already stopped tasting anything. The steak could have been cardboard, the coffee could have been motor oil, and I would not have known the difference. I kept seeing that email on my phone, those clean corporate words sitting in my pocket like a sealed envelope from fate. Final approval needed. It was funny how business could be so honest on paper, while marriage could become so slippery in real life. Madison talked about quarterly targets, client retention, and leadership strategy with that bright professional voice she used when she wanted a room to see her as powerful. I used to admire that voice. I used to think it meant she was brave. That night, it sounded like a door closing from the other side. When the dinner finally ended, Blake shook my hand with 2 fingers and told me it was nice meeting a real blue-collar guy. Madison laughed again, softer this time. Maybe because the night was almost over and she had survived the embarrassment of bringing me. I paid attention to the little things. The way she walked 2 steps ahead of me through the lobby. The way she glanced back only when the valet called for our vehicle. The way her smile tightened when my old Ford F-150 rolled up between a black Mercedes and a silver Lexus. The truck was 12 years old, dark green, with 216,000 miles on it, and a dent near the rear bumper from a winter morning when a forklift operator misjudged the loading bay. I had kept that dent because the operator was a 22-year-old kid named Luis who had cried in my office, thinking I was going to fire him. I told him trucks could be repaired, but a man's confidence was harder to replace. He still worked for me. He now managed 16 drivers and bought his first house outside Grove City last spring. Madison saw an old truck. I saw payroll met, families fed, mistakes forgiven, and miles earned. The valet handed me the keys with more respect than my wife had given me all night. I tipped him $20, climbed in, and waited as Madison slid into the passenger seat carefully, like the fabric might accuse her of something. The cab smelled faintly of leather, black coffee, and cold air from the warehouse lot. She buckled her seat belt and stared straight ahead. For 3 blocks, neither of us spoke. Downtown Columbus moved around us in wet reflections, red brake lights stretching across the pavement, office towers blinking down like silent judges. Finally, Madison exhaled and said, "You were quiet tonight." I kept my eyes on the road. I was listening. She turned toward me. "Ethan, do not do that. Do not make it sound dramatic. It was just business dinner talk." I nodded once. That was the word she always reached for when something hurt me. Just a joke. Just a comment. Just how people talk. Small words used like napkins to wipe fingerprints off a mess. She looked out the window and adjusted her bracelet. You have to understand the environment I work in. People there operate at a different level. I almost asked her what level kindness belonged to, but I did not. I had spent too many years bringing a toolbox to conversations that required a receipt. Instead, I let the silence stretch until she filled it. "I am not saying you do not work hard," she added. "Of course you work hard. But NorthBridge is different. It is national. It is real scale. You cannot expect people like Blake to understand a local warehouse operation. Local. The word sat between us like a box nobody wanted to lift. My warehouse was 68,000 square feet. We ran 34 trucks, 9 regional cross-dock partners, and a routing system I had built with a retired software engineer from Cincinnati who hated meetings and loved clean data. We shipped across Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. We had fewer than 100 employees, but every one of them knew where the emergency exits were, whose kid had a baseball tournament on Saturday, and which customers needed a phone call before sunrise if snow was coming. Madison did not know any of that. Or worse, she had decided none of it counted. When we reached the suburbs, the big houses grew farther apart, lawns trimmed neat, porch lights glowing like nothing ugly ever happened inside. Madison relaxed the closer we got to home, as if distance from that restaurant could turn the night harmless. I pulled into our driveway and parked beside her white Audi. Our house looked perfect from the outside. 2 stories, stone trim, black shutters, hydrangeas along the walkway. The kind of house that told neighbors everything was fine. Inside, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and expensive candles. Madison set her clutch on the kitchen island and kicked off her heels. I hung my jacket over the back of a chair. She watched me like she was waiting for me to start an argument, so she could feel reasonable by comparison. I opened the refrigerator, took out a bottle of water, and twisted the cap slowly. She folded her arms. "Are you upset because I made one little joke?" I looked at her then. Not sharply, not angrily, just long enough for the kitchen to feel less warm. "No," I said. "I am upset because you did not think it was a joke." Her face changed, but only for a second. Then the corporate mask came down again, smooth and practiced. "Ethan, I am tired. I have an early meeting." She walked past me toward the stairs, leaving the faint scent of her perfume behind. The same perfume she used to wear when we were broke and happy and sharing fries in the front seat of this same truck. I stood in the kitchen after she went upstairs, listening to the house settle. Then I pulled out my phone, opened Richard Lawson's email, and read every line of the renewal agreement under the cold light above the sink. The agreement was 47 pages long, and I read it twice before midnight. Not because I needed to understand it. I had written half the operating terms myself 6 months earlier, sitting at the scarred maple desk in my office above the warehouse, while a thunderstorm beat against the tin roof. I read it because documents have a strange mercy. They do not laugh. They do not pretend. They do not dress disrespect up as humor and then ask why you are bleeding. Clause by clause, the contract said what Madison had forgotten how to say. Caldwell Regional Solutions mattered. Our routing network mattered. Our trucks mattered. Our drivers mattered. The same little operation she had dismissed over filet mignon was guaranteeing 2-day regional delivery for 87 NorthBridge stores across 5 states. Every number on those pages had a face behind it. Earl Jenkins, 61 years old, who kept peppermint candies in the cup holder of truck 12 and knew every back road between Dayton and Fort Wayne. Marisol Vega, who ran dispatch like an air traffic controller and could reroute 6 delayed loads before most people finished their first coffee. Luis Ortega, the kid who once dented my truck and now handled morning crews with the steady patience of a man twice his age. These were not hobbies with invoices. These were people, mortgages, lunchboxes, school shoes, health insurance cards, and paychecks that cleared every Friday before noon because I had promised myself they always would. I set the contract on the kitchen island and looked toward the dark staircase. Madison was asleep upstairs, or pretending to be. Years ago, that silence would have pulled me toward her. I would have gone up, sat on the edge of the bed, apologized for being too sensitive, and let her make the room normal again. That was the old rhythm. She cut. I explained why it hurt. She sighed, and somehow I ended up holding the bandage. But that night, under the cold kitchen light, I did not move. I just stood there with the renewal agreement open in front of me and let memory do what memory does when a marriage starts cracking. It takes you back to the beginning, not because it wants to comfort you, but because it wants to show you the distance. Madison met me when my first warehouse was not even a warehouse. It was a rented 6,000 square foot metal building on the edge of Plain City with a cracked concrete floor, one working bay door, and a bathroom sink that rattled like loose change whenever a truck passed outside. I had 3 employees, 2 used box trucks, and a coffee maker that burned everything by 8 in the morning. She was 26 then, fresh out of graduate school, working in account management, sharp as a tack and hungry in a way I respected. The first time she came by, she wore jeans, a red Ohio State sweatshirt, and white sneakers that were ruined within 10 minutes because the lot turned to mud after rain. I apologized. She laughed, held up one muddy shoe, and said, "I guess this is what building something looks like." I loved her for that. Not because she understood logistics. She did not. She thought pallet jacks were forklifts and forklifts were all called trucks. I loved her because she looked at the mess and saw a beginning instead of a failure. On our 2nd anniversary, we ate burgers on the tailgate of my Ford under a flickering security light because I had missed our dinner reservation fixing a refrigeration issue for a grocery client. I was covered in sweat, frustrated, ashamed, ready for her to tell me I had ruined the night. Instead, she handed me fries, leaned against my shoulder, and said, "One day this place will be huge, and I will say I knew you when you smelled like cardboard." Back then, her teasing had warmth in it. It made me feel seen. There is a difference between being laughed with and being laughed at. A man knows the difference even when he pretends he does not. The change did not happen all at once. It never does. Disrespect does not always. Kick the door open. Sometimes it takes off its shoes and moves in quietly. Madison got promoted, then promoted again. Her dinners moved from sports bars to private rooms. Her friends started using words like equity, brand position, and executive presence. I was proud of her. I bought her the leather briefcase she wanted and stayed up past midnight listening to her practice presentations. When she came home tired, I packed her lunch before leaving for the warehouse at 5 in the morning. When she cried after losing her first major account, I sat beside her on the laundry room floor and told her one bad quarter did not define a career. I believe that. I still do. But somewhere along the line, Madison stopped telling people I ran a logistics company and started saying I owned a little delivery business. Then she stopped inviting me to certain events. Then she started correcting my shirts before we left the house. Not helping. Correcting. The collar. The boots. The watch. The way I said route instead of distribution lane. Each correction was small enough to survive by itself, but together they built a wall I kept pretending was just weather. I looked down at the contract again. My signature line waited at the bottom of the final page, clean and patient. For the first time in years, I did not feel behind Madison. I did not feel beneath her world. I felt separate from it, and that scared me more than anger ever could. Because anger still wants to be heard. Separation just starts making plans. By sunrise, the house had gone back to pretending. That was what houses like ours did best. The coffee machine clicked on at 6, the thermostat hummed, the sprinkler heads ticked across the front lawn, and the neighborhood outside looked soft and harmless under a pale Ohio sky. Madison came downstairs in a cream blouse and tailored slacks, her hair smooth, her phone already in her hand. She looked rested in the way successful people learn to look rested even when they are not. I was at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and the renewal agreement inside a plain folder beside my elbow. I had not signed it. I had not rejected it either. There are moments in a man's life when doing nothing is not weakness. It is the last quiet space before a decision becomes real. Madison poured coffee without looking at me. Her bracelet tapped against the mug, a small bright sound in the silence. I watched her move through the kitchen that I had renovated with weekend money and tired hands. The white cabinets, the stone counters, the deep farmhouse sink she had picked from a catalog and then forgotten cost more than my first month of warehouse rent. She checked her reflection in the microwave door and said, I have a leadership call at 8. Then I might be late tonight. I said, big day? She smiled at her phone, not at me. Every day is a big day when the company actually operates at scale. There it was again, not thrown hard enough to count as an insult, not soft enough to miss. I took a sip of coffee and let the bitterness sit on my tongue. She glanced at the folder. What is that? Paperwork. For your warehouse thing? I looked at the folder, then back at her. Something like that. She made a small sound, half laugh, half sigh, and dropped a piece of toast into the toaster. I do not know how you deal with all those delivery forms. I would lose my mind. At NorthBridge, we are looking at national expansion models and enterprise-level partnerships. Completely different universe. I almost told her those enterprise-level partnerships were leaning on trucks that started rolling from my lot before most of her executives had opened their laptops. I almost told her that the Columbus Regional Recovery Plan she bragged about last month had worked because Marisol rerouted 92 pallets through a partner dock in Toledo during a snowstorm while Madison was at a conference in Scottsdale. I almost told her that her biggest client retention presentation had a backbone made of my drivers, my dispatchers, my fuel costs, my sleepless nights. But truth given too early becomes an argument, and I was done arguing for basic respect. She left at 7:15, her Audi backing down the driveway with silent confidence. I watched from the kitchen window until the white car turned the corner. Then I picked up the folder, grabbed my keys, and drove to the warehouse. Morning on the west side of Columbus has a different honesty than downtown at night. No chandeliers, no polished wine glasses, no men like Blake laughing over plates that cost more than a week of groceries for some families. Just loading docks, chain-link fences, gas station coffee, and 18-wheelers breathing steam in the cool air. Caldwell Regional Solutions sat at the end of an industrial road between a packaging supplier and a machine parts distributor. The sign out front was simple, blue letters on white metal. I had paid for it in cash after our first profitable year, and stood in the lot for 10 minutes looking at it like a new father looking through hospital glass. Inside, the warehouse was already awake. Forklifts beeped. Bay doors rolled up. Pallets wrapped in clear plastic waited in clean rows under fluorescent lights. Someone had brought donuts and left the box open near dispatch. Luis was on the floor in a reflective vest, talking to a driver about a Cincinnati delay. Marisol stood behind 3 monitors, headset on, coffee in hand, moving loads across the region with calm precision. She saw me and pointed toward my office without ending her call. "Richard Lawson called twice already," she mouthed. I nodded. My office overlooked the warehouse through a wide interior window. From up there, I could see the whole operation breathing, men and women moving with purpose, each motion connected to something larger than itself. I sat down, opened my laptop, and saw Richard's messages stacked in my inbox. Polite at first, then more urgent. NorthBridge needed the renewal signed before their executive review. Their board wanted stability. Their operations team wanted continuity. Their expansion plan depended on our guaranteed capacity through the holidays. I leaned back in my chair and looked through the glass at Truck 7 easing into Bay 3. Earl Jenkins climbed down from the cab, stretched his back, and waved at a new hire like the day had not already asked too much of him. That was real scale to me. Not a slogan on a slide. Not a title under a name. Real scale was whether Earl made it home by 6 to have dinner with his wife. Real scale was whether Luis had enough staff to load safely. Real scale was whether a customer in Grand Rapids opened their doors on Monday and found what we promised would be there. My phone buzzed. Richard Lawson again. I let it ring twice, then answered. "Ethan," he said, sounding relieved and tense at the same time. "I am glad I caught you. We need to get this renewal wrapped up today." I looked at the unsigned signature line on my screen. Richard was a decent man. Numbers first, politics second, ego last. I respected that. I said I read it. "Good," he said. "Then we are aligned?" I watched Madison's company logo glow at the top of the document. The blue looked colder than it had yesterday. "Not yet," I said. There was a pause, the kind that makes expensive offices go quiet. "Ethan, is there a problem with the terms?" I turned my chair toward the warehouse window. Down below, my people kept moving. No one laughed. No one minimized. No one needed me to be impressive. They just needed me to be steady. I said, "There might be a problem with the relationship." Richard did not answer right away. I could hear office noise behind him, the muted rush of printers, low voices, someone laughing too far from the phone to know what had just shifted. Then a door closed on his end, and his voice dropped half an octave. "Ethan, when you say relationship, are we talking service levels, pricing, executive alignment, or something else?" That was why I liked Richard. He did not panic first. He categorized. I looked at the renewal agreement on my screen, then at the warehouse floor below, where Truck 12 was being loaded with NorthBridge freight bound for Indianapolis, Louisville, and Pittsburgh. Same blue labels, same clean barcodes, same promises we had been keeping while people in tower offices called it strategy. I said, "I am talking about whether Caldwell continues to be the right partner for NorthBridge after the current term ends." Another pause. This one had weight. "Ethan," he said carefully, "your team has outperformed every regional carrier we have used in 10 years. The board knows it. Operations knows it. I know it. If this is about rate pressure, let us solve that." It was not about rates. Money is simple. Compared to respect, a dollar has a number printed on it. Respect is harder. People can spend years taking it from you in coins so small you do not realize you are going broke until the drawer is empty. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of the folder on my desk and watched Marisol point sharply at a monitor, redirecting a driver around construction on Interstate 70. I said, "The terms are not the issue." "Then help me understand," Richard said. I could have told him everything. The restaurant. Blake's two-finger handshake. Madison's laughter. The way my work became a punchline in a room full of people who benefited from it. But a man has to be careful when Payne walks into business wearing a good suit. If you let it talk too much, people call it emotional. If you make it too quiet, they think it is negotiable. I chose the middle. I said, "There are concerns about how NorthBridge evaluates and treats strategic partners when those partners are not in the room." Richard went silent long enough for me to know he understood there was more under that sentence than I had put into words. Finally, he said, "Did someone say something?" I looked through the glass at Earl Jenkins signing a tablet with his thick finger, peppermint candy tucked in his cheek like always. I thought about how Madison had once asked me not to wear my company polo to a backyard barbecue because, in her words, it made everything feel too warehouse. I thought about Blake asking if I moved office chairs. I thought about my wife raising a glass to real business. Someone said enough, I replied. Richard breathed out through his nose. Ethan, I am going to be direct. We cannot afford instability here. Your network is not easily replaceable. The holiday plan is built around your capacity. If there is an executive issue, I can address it. I almost smiled at that. In corporate America, every human wound becomes an executive issue once enough revenue is attached to it. I said I appreciate that, but I am not asking you to address it today. I am telling you I will not be signing the renewal this morning. I need time. He did not like that. I heard it in the way his chair creaked. How much time? By noon tomorrow, I said. That is when my current offer expires internally. Internally? We have other opportunities. That was not a bluff. 3 companies have been waiting for us to free capacity for months. 1 grocery chain, 1 medical supplier, 1 regional hardware group with messy lanes and honest people. None of them had Madison's company logo, but none of them had laughed at my table either. Richard lowered his voice further. Ethan, I am asking you not to make a fast decision over one bad interaction. I looked at the framed photo on my desk, taken 7 years earlier on the day we opened this facility. Madison stood beside me in that picture, smiling in a yellow sundress, one hand on my arm, proud enough then to be seen next to the sign. Behind us, the building was still half empty. We had 20 employees and more hope than cash. I remembered her whispering, "You did it." I remembered believing she meant we. I said, "This decision has not been fast." After we hung up, the office felt too still. The warehouse moved below me, but up there all I heard was the faint buzz of the lights and the old wall clock ticking toward whatever came next. I opened a second folder, the one labeled Capacity Reallocation. It was not something I built that morning. It had been sitting in my system for 3 months because good operators prepare before storms make the news. Lane maps, revenue comparisons, labor impact, fuel projections, customer transition timelines. If Caldwell walked away from NorthBridge, we would lose volume for about 6 weeks, then recover with better margins by the second quarter. My people would be safe. Payroll would be safe. That mattered more than pride. Pride is loud. Responsibility is quiet and heavier. At 10:30, Madison texted me. Big meeting got moved up. NorthBridge is finalizing something major today. Wish me luck. I stared at the message. There was no question about my morning. No mention of last night. No apology hiding between the lines. Just Madison standing in the sunlight of a win she did not know was waiting on my signature. I typed 3 different replies and deleted all of them. Finally, I wrote, "Good luck." She sent back a smiling emoji. It looked bright, empty, and miles away. At 11:15, Luis knocked once and stepped into my office holding a clipboard. "Boss, we have a NorthBridge pickup asking for priority on lane 5. They say it came from corporate." I stood and walked to the window. Below, a driver in a NorthBridge branded jacket waited by the dock, checking his phone like urgency was something he had invented. I nodded slowly. "Standard order," I said. "No special handling unless it is in the contract." Luis looked at me for 1 extra second, catching the change in my voice. Then he nodded. "Yes, sir." When he left, I turned back to the screen. The signature line was still there, patient as a trap. For years, I had built my life around making other people's emergencies disappear. That morning, I finally understood something my father used to say when I was young and too eager to please. "Son, never let a man who mocks your ladder ask you to climb down and fix his roof." I closed the renewal agreement without signing it. By early afternoon, the air inside the warehouse had turned sharp with motion. Forklifts crossed the floor in clean lanes, dock doors rose and fell, scanners chirped, and the smell of shrink wrap, diesel, and coffee held the building together like a working man's prayer. I walked the floor slower than usual, not because I had nothing to do, but because I needed to see every moving piece before I touched the one that could change everything. Truck 12 rolled out at 1:10, headed east on Interstate 70 with a partial NorthBridge load and 2 medical supply pallets behind it. Truck 9 was due back from Cincinnati by 4. Earl had already left for Fort Wayne, steady as sunrise, peppermint candy in his mouth and a weathered ball cap pulled low over his eyes. Nobody on that floor knew my marriage was sitting on the edge of a contract clause. Nobody needed to know. That was the difference between leadership and noise. When the roof leaks, you do not gather everyone beneath it and describe the storm. You get a ladder, find the seam, and keep the water off their heads. At 1:35, Marisol stepped into my office without knocking, which meant something was wrong enough to skip manners. She held her headset against one ear and pointed at her tablet. NorthBridge Corporate just escalated again. They want dedicated capacity held for next week, even though the renewal is not signed. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the numbers on her screen. 3 lanes. Columbus to Indianapolis. Columbus to Louisville. Columbus to Pittsburgh. The same lanes Richard had called impossible to replace. What did you tell them? I asked. She gave me the look she used when someone had mistaken kindness for permission. I told them we honor active terms, not imaginary ones. For the first time that day, I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, but because competence can feel like mercy when everything else is falling apart. Good, I said. Keep it standard. No exceptions unless I approve them. She studied me for a second. Marisol had worked for me for 9 years. She knew the weight of a room before anyone said the wrong thing. Is this going to get ugly? She asked. I looked through the glass at Louise, helping a new driver back into Bay 2, one hand raised, patient and calm. Not if we do it right. That answer seemed to satisfy her, but not completely. She nodded and left. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. This time it was not Richard. It was Madison. Her name filled the screen, bright and familiar, the same way it had during our first years when a call from her could lift the whole day. I let it ring twice, then answered. Hey, I said. She did not say hello. Did someone from NorthBridge contact you today? Her voice had that clipped professional edge, the one she used when she wanted facts lined up neatly. I turned my chair away from the warehouse window. Richard called, I said. Why? She exhaled fast. Because there is some issue with a regional logistics vendor, and the whole leadership floor is acting like the building is on fire. Blake is furious. Richard is in with the chief executive officer. Operations is pulling reports from last year. I heard my own heartbeat once, slow and even. Did they say the vendor name? No, she said, impatient. Something regional. Caldwell something. My fingers tightened around the phone, but my voice stayed calm. Caldwell Regional. Solutions. Silence. Not full understanding yet. Just a pause at the edge of it. Then she said, wait. Is that connected to you? Connected. Not yours. Not did you build that. Connected. Even when the truth knocked, she opened the door only an inch. I said, it is my company. Another silence came through the line, deeper this time. I could picture her standing in some glass conference room, phone pressed to her ear, eyes narrowing as her world tried to rearrange itself without permission. What do you mean it is your company? She asked. I mean I own it. I founded it. Caldwell Regional Solutions is the operating name we use for regional contracts that require separate billing and lane management. NorthBridge has been working with us for 18 months. Madison let out a small sound, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. That is not possible. I would have known. I looked down at the old photo on my desk again, the one where she used to look proud beside the building. You could have known. You never asked. Her voice sharpened. Ethan, do not turn this into some marriage lecture. I am at work. This is serious. That sentence landed harder than the ones from dinner, because she still did not hear herself. I am at work too, I said. She ignored that. Are you the reason Richard is delaying the renewal? I am the reason there is a renewal to delay. The line went quiet except for faint office noise behind her. I imagined NorthBridge moving around her, reports opening, numbers spreading across screens, executives realizing the little company they did not see had been holding up more than they admitted. Madison lowered her voice. Did you tell them about last night? No. Then why are you doing this? There it was. Not what happened. Not did I hurt you. Not I am sorry. Why are you doing this? As if consequences were inventions and not reflections. I stood and walked to the window. Below me, Truck 9 backed into the lot, reverse lights glowing red against wet pavement. Because I am reviewing whether this partnership still makes sense, I said. Partnership? She repeated. Ethan, this is my company. A major account is at stake. My bonus is tied to this quarter. Blake is already asking questions. If this falls apart, people will look at me. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Not from weakness. From recognition. She was not afraid of losing me. Not yet. She was afraid of being seen standing too close to the man she had laughed at. I opened my eyes and said, Madison, last night you told a table full of people my work was embarrassing. Today that work is suddenly important because it affects your meeting. You need to sit with that. Her breathing changed. I could hear anger trying to dress itself as urgency. We will talk about this at home, she said. No, I replied. We will talk when you understand what we are actually talking about. Before she could answer, I ended the call. My hand stayed around the phone for a moment after the screen went dark. It did not feel good. That surprised me. I thought maybe the first clean line drawn would feel like victory. It did not. It felt like setting down something heavy and realizing how long you had been carrying it. By 4 o'clock, the warehouse had settled into that late-day rhythm where every sound seemed more deliberate. The morning rush was gone, the afternoon corrections were in motion, and the last outbound loads were lining up under gray Ohio light. Rain had started again, light at first, tapping the roof in a patient pattern. I stood beside Bay 4 with Luis, watching a pallet of home appliances get wrapped for a hardware client in Dayton. He was explaining a staffing adjustment for next week, but part of my mind stayed on Madison's voice. This is my company. A major account is at stake. My bonus is tied to this quarter. That was the order of her concern. Not us. Not the wound. The company, the account, the bonus, the appearance. I did not hate her for it. Hate would have been simpler. Hate burns clean for a while, then leaves ash. What I felt was colder and more complicated. It was the ache of realizing someone you loved had learned to measure you only after finding a price tag. Luis finished his update and paused. You good, boss? I looked at him. He was 31 now, shoulders broader than when I hired him, wedding band scratched from work, safety glasses pushed up on his head. I remembered. Him at 22, scared, apologizing over a dented truck like his whole future depended on the next sentence out of my mouth. I said, I am working on it. He nodded like that was enough. Good men do not always need details. Sometimes they just need to know the load is not shifting. Back upstairs, Richard had sent another email marked urgent. This one included 3 people copied above him, including the chief executive officer of NorthBridge, a woman named Patricia Monroe. The message was professional, but the pressure showed through every line. NorthBridge requested a call at 5:30 to discuss continuity, strategic alignment, and any concerns that may impact renewal. Strategic alignment. There it was again, corporate language trying to put a clean tablecloth over a cracked foundation. I accepted the call. Then I opened the capacity plan and made one final adjustment. If we walked away, NorthBridge would not fail overnight. I was not interested in destruction. That was never who I was. They would struggle, they would pay more, they would explain losses in rooms where people used laser pointers and careful phrases, but stores would still open and customers would still get packages eventually. My decision was not about harming them. It was about no longer saving them at the expense of myself. At 5:26, I shut my office door. The warehouse lights glowed beyond the glass, rows of pallets stretching below me like proof. I placed a legal pad on the desk, though I did not need notes. Then the video call opened. Richard appeared first, tie loosened, face tight. Patricia Monroe joined a second later from a conference room with a long table and a wall of dark windows behind her. 2 operations directors appeared in separate boxes. Then Blake Harrington joined, leaning too close to his camera, jaw set, expensive watch catching the light as he adjusted his cuff. Madison was not on the call. Not yet. Patricia spoke first. Mr. Caldwell, thank you for making time. We understand there are concerns regarding the renewal. I appreciate the opportunity, I said. My voice sounded calm, almost distant, like it belonged to the version of me that read contracts. Instead of taking insults personally, Blake jumped in before Richard could speak. Ethan, I think there has been some confusion. We value all of our vendors, of course, but we need to avoid emotional disruptions to critical business operations. Emotional disruptions. I looked at his face on the screen and remembered him raising a glass to real business. I waited one beat, long enough for the words to hang there without my help. Then I said, Blake, the disruption is operational, contractual, and strategic. Nothing emotional appears in the agreement. Richard looked down. Patricia's eyes shifted toward Blake's box. The room behind her seemed to tighten. I continued. Caldwell Regional Solutions has provided capacity, recovery coverage, lane optimization, and delivery performance beyond the original scope for 18 months. We absorbed fuel volatility twice. We stabilized holiday overflow when 2 national carriers missed service levels. We protected your Midwest rollout when the Indiana distribution center went live 3 weeks behind schedule. Those are facts. Patricia nodded slowly. They are. Blake's mouth tightened. Nobody is disputing performance. Good, I said. Then let us talk about respect for performance. Richard cleared his throat. Ethan, could you define the specific concern? I clicked share screen. A simple slide appeared, one I had made myself. No bright colors. No dramatic title. Just 4 columns. Contracted scope, actual support, financial impact, renewal risk. The numbers filled the screen quietly. $11.3 million in avoided penalties. 43% reduction in late regional deliveries. 87 stores stabilized. 96.8% on-time performance. A silence followed that felt heavier than applause ever could. Blake glanced away from his camera. Patricia leaned closer to her screen. One operations director whispered something to someone off camera. I said, I built this company to solve problems, not to become invisible inside them. I do not require applause. My team does not require flattery. But we do require professional respect, especially from executives whose departments benefit directly from our work. Blake gave a short, stiff laugh. Are we seriously having a conversation about hurt feelings? Richard's eyes closed for half a second. Patricia turned her head toward someone outside the frame. Then she looked back at me. Blake, she said, stop talking. 3 words. Quiet, controlled, and sharper than any raised voice. Blake froze. Before anyone could continue, another box appeared on the call. Madison Caldwell. Her camera flickered on, and there she was in a glass conference room, face pale under fluorescent light, lips pressed together, NorthBridge badge hanging from her blazer. For a moment, she looked at the shared screen without understanding. Then her eyes moved to the ownership line at the bottom of the document. Caldwell Regional Solutions, founded and wholly owned by Ethan M. Caldwell. I watched the truth reach her. Not all at once. Truth rarely does that. It arrived in pieces. The company name. The numbers. The client impact. My name. Her husband. Not as a man beside her in an old truck, but as the person everyone in that room suddenly needed. Madison's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Blake stared downward. Patricia folded her hands. Richard looked like a man who had warned the weather and still watched people leave their windows open. I stopped sharing the screen. The call returned to faces, all of them smaller now. Patricia spoke carefully. Mr. Caldwell, what would it take to move forward? I looked at Madison. She looked back, and for the first time in a long time, she did not look embarrassed to be connected to me. She looked afraid that other people finally knew she should not have been. Patricia's question stayed on the screen longer than anyone's voice. What would it take to move forward? Simple question. Complicated answer. 5 years earlier, I would have set a better rate, a longer term, maybe fuel adjustment protection and a cleaner payment schedule. 3 years earlier, I might have asked for dedicated forecasting access or stronger volume commitments. 1 year earlier, I probably would have signed the renewal and told myself respect would come later, the way tired men promise themselves rest after the next deadline. But that evening, with Madison watching from a conference room she had entered too late, I understood that some contracts end before the paper does. I folded my hands on the desk so nobody could see how tightly my fingers had locked together. Patricia, I said, Caldwell will honor every active commitment through the end of the current term. Every scheduled load will move. Every open purchase order will be handled according to the agreement. Your stores will not be left stranded. Richard's shoulders dropped a fraction, relief trying to enter the room before the rest of my sentence stopped it. But we will not renew under the current structure, I continued. Not now. Blake shifted in his chair. Madison blinked once, hard. Patricia did not move. She was too experienced to react before she had all the damage in view. May I ask why? She said. I looked at the legal pad in front of me. The page was blank. I had not written a single talking point because the truth did not need formatting. Because a partnership cannot be measured only when it is useful, I said. For 18 months, my team has been treated like a hidden support beam. Strong enough to hold weight. Inconvenient to acknowledge. Invisible until someone hears cracking. That is not sustainable for us. Richard leaned toward his camera. Ethan, we can correct recognition issues. We can build a supplier governance structure, direct executive access, quarterly business reviews. The words were good. The timing was not. I respected Richard enough to answer him plainly. I know you can build those things, but I need to ask why they only became possible after I refused to sign. Nobody answered that. The silence moved across the call box by box. Patricia looked down at something on the table. Blake studied his own hands. Madison stared at me like I had become a language she should have learned years ago. Then Blake made one more mistake. Ethan, he said, let us not pretend this is not personal. Everyone knows you and Madison are married. If there was a misunderstanding at dinner, we can apologize and move on without disrupting a multimillion-dollar relationship. A misunderstanding. That word tried to shrink the whole night down to a napkin stain. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Blake, I said, a misunderstanding is when someone misreads a delivery window. Last night was not a misunderstanding. It was an assessment. You assessed me when you thought I had no business value to you. Madison's face tightened. I kept my eyes on Blake's little square. You were comfortable then. Now you are uncomfortable because the assessment has consequences. Patricia spoke before Blake could answer. Blake, leave the call. His face changed, almost offended. Then he looked off screen as if searching for support in the glass walls around him. He found none. A second later, his box disappeared. The screen looked cleaner without him. Patricia turned back to me. Mr. Caldwell, I apologize for any disrespect shown by my executive team. It was the right sentence. Corporate, careful, useful. But I had lived long enough to know the difference between apology and repair. I nodded once. I appreciate that. Madison finally spoke. Ethan, just my name. Soft, uncertain, pulled out of her like something that had been buried. On the call, in front of Patricia, Richard, and the two operations directors, she had nothing polished to say. No presentation voice. No clever correction. No easy joke. She looked smaller than she had at the restaurant, not because she had lost power, but because truth had removed the stage lighting. I waited. She swallowed. I did not know. For words. Maybe the saddest ones she could have chosen. Because they were true, but not innocent. I said, that was the problem. You did not know because you did not want to know. Her eyes shone under the conference room lights, but I did not look away. There had been years when one crack in her voice could make me abandon my own hurt and rush to protect her from feeling guilty. Those years had trained me well. They just had not trained me forever. Patricia cleared her throat gently. Perhaps the personal conversation should happen separately. I agree, I said. For NorthBridge, my position is clear. We will complete the current term, decline the renewal, and provide a transition file within 72 hours. Richard looked like he wanted to argue, but knew. The numbers had already moved beyond emotion. Patricia asked, are you willing to consider a future engagement after transition? I thought about my warehouse, about Marisol's steady voice, Luis's patience, Earl's peppermint candies, the people who had carried emergencies they never caused. I thought about Madison laughing under amber restaurant lights. Future engagement, I said, would require a different structure, different terms, and different people involved in partner management. Patricia understood the last part immediately. Madison did too. Her eyes dropped. The call ended 3 minutes later with formal language and heavy faces. When the screen went black, my office returned around me. The rain had thickened against the windows. Below, the last truck of the evening rolled out of Base 6, headlights cutting through the wet lot. For a moment, I sat there without moving. I had expected triumph to feel warmer. Instead, it felt clean and lonely, like standing in an empty room after the movers leave. My phone lit up almost immediately. Madison. Then again. Then again. I let it ring. Not to punish her. Punishment was loud, and I had no use for it. I let it ring because for once, my silence did not belong to fear. It belonged to me. Madison was waiting in the kitchen when I got home. The house was lit too brightly. Every recessed light turned on as if brightness could force honesty into the room. Her Audi sat crooked in the driveway, one tire near the grass, something she would have criticized me for if the night had belonged to anyone else. I parked the Ford beside it, shut off the engine, and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. Rain tapped the windshield in thin silver lines. The dashboard clock read 8:42. Through the front window, I could see her standing by the island in the same blazer from the call, arms folded, shoulders tight. For years, I had come home from hard days ready to make myself smaller so peace could fit through the door. That night, I did not shrink. I stepped inside, hung my wet jacket on the chair, and set my keys in the ceramic bowl by the entryway. Madison watched every ordinary movement like it was evidence. Her eyes were red, but her makeup was still careful. That told me she had cried enough to feel wronged, not enough to understand why. Ethan, she said, her voice lower than usual. We need to fix this. I looked at her across the kitchen I had built on weekends, across the island where the contract had sat and signed the night before. Fix what? Her mouth opened, then closed. The NorthBridge situation, she said. Patricia is furious with Blake. Richard is trying to stabilize operations. My department is under review. People are asking why I did not know. There it was again. The company walked into the room before the marriage did. I nodded slowly. They are asking the right question. She pressed her palms flat against the counter. That is not fair. You never told me the regional contract was yours. I walked to the refrigerator, took out a bottle of water, and placed it on the counter without opening it. I told you about the subsidiary when we formed it. You said, and I remember this exactly, that you could not keep track of all my little paperwork names. Her face flickered. I did not mean it like that. No one ever does, I said. That is the strange thing about disrespect. It always wants credit for being accidental. Madison looked away toward the dark window over the sink. For a few seconds, the only sound was rain against the glass and the soft hum of the refrigerator. Then she turned back, and her voice changed into the one she used in meetings when numbers were sliding the wrong way. If Caldwell leaves, it hurts NorthBridge badly. It hurts my team. It could hurt my career. You have to understand that. I almost laughed, but there was no humor left in me. I do understand it. I understood every lane, every store, every missed delivery we prevented, every weekend my staff worked, so your people could walk into Monday meetings with clean charts. I understood it when you called my company a hobby. I understood it when Blake mocked me and you smiled. I understood it when you raised your glass to real business while my signature was sitting in my inbox. Her eyes filled again. I was embarrassed, she whispered. The words came out small, and for 1 second I saw the woman from the old warehouse, the woman with muddy shoes and burger wrappers, buried under years of ambition and polished rooms. Embarrassed of me? I asked. She swallowed. Of the contrast. Of not knowing how to explain us. You are so grounded, and my world is so different. People judge. I stepped closer, not angry, just tired of distance pretending to be safety. Madison, people can only use the version of me you hand them. Last night, you handed them a joke. She pressed her fingers to her lips. I am sorry. Finally, the words arrived. But they landed late, and late apologies have to carry more weight than early ones. I studied her face. What are you sorry for? She looked confused, almost startled. For what I said. For not knowing. For laughing. For putting you in that position. It was a good list. It was not the root. I said, you are sorry because the room found out I matter. She shook her head quickly. No, that is not fair. I am your wife. I love you. Love, I said quietly, is not supposed to need a revenue report. That broke something in her expression. She gripped the edge of the island like the room had shifted beneath her. I did not feel powerful watching it. I felt older, sadder, like a man standing in front of a house he had spent years repairing, finally admitting the foundation had moved too far. She said, what do you want me to do? I looked around the kitchen, at the counters, the framed vacation photo, the bowl of mail, the life that looked intact if you did not touch it too hard. I want you to stop asking how to save the situation and start asking what kind of wife you became while I was building the thing you were ashamed of. Her tears slipped then, quiet and steady. She did not argue. Maybe that was the first honest gift she had given me all day. I pulled the folder from my work bag and set it on the island. Not the NorthBridge renewal. A different folder. Financial separation documents. Preliminary, clean, prepared months ago after one too many dinners where I came home feeling like a guest in my own marriage. Madison stared at it, as if paper could make a sound. Ethan, she whispered. I am not filing tonight, I said. But I am done pretending this started at a restaurant. Her hand moved toward the folder, then stopped. Outside, a car passed slowly on the wet street, headlights sliding across the ceiling and disappearing. I picked up my keys again. I am going to stay at the apartment above the warehouse for a few nights. We can talk when the panic is gone. She looked at me then, truly looked, without the polish, without the performance. For a moment, I thought she might say something that belonged to us instead of NorthBridge. But all she managed was, are we going to be okay? I opened the door and felt the cool rain air move into the house. I said, I do not know. And for the first time in years, I did not soften the truth to make it easier for her to hold.